She is 29, your grace, Lady Pemberton said, lowering her fan just enough to let the words carry, and quite past all hope of a match. One does wonder why she troubles to come at all. Alaric, Duke of Ravenmoor, did not turn his head. He had been standing at the edge of the Ashcombe ballroom for the better part of an hour, watching the whole gilded pantomime as a man watches a river he does not intend to swim in, and he had learned long ago that the surest way to hear a thing was to give the impression he was not listening. So he heard the whole of it, the little laugh, the practiced pity, the way three women turned their painted heads toward a figure standing alone by the far window, and then turned back to one another as if they'd settled some point of law. He followed their glance. She stood beneath the tall casement with the frost blooming white at its corners, a woman in a gown of plain slate silk that had plainly been let out and taken in more than once in its life, her dark hair drawn back without a single fashionable curl. Her gloved hands folded before her with the stillness of someone who had made stillness her armor. She was not looking at the room. She was looking out through the black glass at the winter garden beyond, where the lamps threw long amber lines across the snow, and there was something in the set of her mouth, not sorrow, exactly, but a settled, unhurried patience, that arrested him where the whole glittering assembly had not. Charlotte Merrow, said the man at his elbow, following his gaze. It was Ashcombe himself, their host, a genial fool with a good cellar, Sir Roland's eldest. He left her a little money and a great many opinions. She refused Colonel Havering 3 seasons ago, and has been paying for it ever since. The mammas won't have her near their sons, bad for the daughter's chances, you understand, to have a clever spinster about who says what she thinks. Clever, Alaric repeated, dangerously so. She corrected the bishop on his Latin at supper, to his face. Ashcombe chuckled and drank. You can imagine how that went down. Alaric did not answer. He was watching Charlotte Merrow lift her chin a fraction as Lady Pemberton and her circle drifted nearer, close enough now that their words must reach her, and he watched her hear them, watched the small, deliberate composure with which she declined to flinch, and he felt something old and cold in his chest shift, like a stone rolling off a grave. He had come to the Ashcombe route because his sister had begged it of him, and because a duke who never appeared became, in the mouths of the ambitious, a duke who might be caught. For 11 years, since the fever took Eleanor in the second spring of their marriage, he had let himself be called the Duke of Ravenmoor and nothing warmer. He had let them call him cold. It was easier than the truth, which was that he had loved once and had not the smallest wish to be made a fool of by hope again. Every season the same procession filed past him, the accomplished daughters, the arch-heiresses, the mothers with their inventories of virtues. And every season he had bowed and said nothing and gone home to Ravenmoor and his horses and his silence, and thought himself the last honest man in England. And now here was a woman by a frozen window whom the whole room had agreed to pity, standing straighter under their contempt than any of them stood under their diamonds. They will drive her out before midnight, Alaric said. Who? The Merrow girl? Ashcombe shrugged. She'll go quietly. She always does. Comes for the music, Merrow says, and leaves before the dancing. Doesn't dance. Why not? Who would ask her? Alaric handed his glass to a passing footman without looking at the man. Ravenmoor. Ashcombe's brows had climbed. You are not going to... But the Duke was already moving. He crossed the floor the way he did everything, without hurry and without hesitation, and he felt the room notice him the moment he stepped clear of the shadows, felt the ripple of it, the heads turning, the fans stilling. The sudden charged silence of 100 people watching the most sought-after and least catchable man in 3 counties walk with plain purpose toward the one woman none of them would touch. Lady Pemberton's laugh die in her throat. He did not slow. Charlotte Merrow turned from the window when his shadow fell across the frost, and for one instant her face was unguarded, and he saw in it not the flutter he was accustomed to but a flare of pure, wary intelligence, as though she were already 3 moves ahead and looking for the trap. Miss Merrow, he said and bowed. I am Ravenmoor. I know who you are, your grace. Her voice was low and even entirely without tremor. The whole room knows who you are. It is rather the point of view. Behind him he heard someone gasp. He very nearly smiled and did not, because he sensed that a smile too soon would be taken by her, rightly, as condescension. You are not dancing, he said. No, the next is a waltz. Will you dance it with me? Something crossed her face then, swift and controlled, but he caught it, because he had spent the whole hour learning to read her. It was not pleasure. It was suspicion, hard and clear. Why? She asked. The bluntness of it might have offended a lesser man. It steadied him. Because I should like to. That is not an answer, Your Grace, it is a courtesy, and I have had a great deal of experience distinguishing the two. She glanced past him once, at the watching room, at Lady Pemberton frozen mid-whisper, and then back. You have chosen to be seen crossing a ballroom to a woman everyone here has decided is a joke. Either you have not understood that, in which case you are less clever than they say, or you have understood it perfectly, in which case I should very much like to know what you want with me before I take your hand. Alaric looked at her for a long moment. The orchestra was tuning. The whole assembly held its breath, straining to hear, and could not, and hated that it could not. What I want, he said quietly, so that only she could hear it, is to spend the length of one waltz in the company of the only person in this room who has said a single true thing to me all evening. They have agreed you are past marrying and beneath notice, Miss Merrow. I have watched them agree it, and I have watched you decline to break under it, and I find that I would rather stand at a frozen window with you than sit in the warm center of that. He inclined his head toward the glittering crowd without turning to look at it. I make no promises and I ask for none. I ask for one dance. You may find me as tedious as they are before it ends and be quit of me entirely, but I would be glad if you would let me try to be an exception to your experience. She studied him. He let her. He had the odd sensation of being weighed on a very old and very accurate set of scales, and of not being at all certain of the verdict. One dance, Charlotte Merrow said at last, and she put her gloved hand in his. The music began, and Alaric led her out into the center of the floor, into the full blaze of the chandeliers, and the full stare of the room that had come to laugh, and something in him he had thought long dead lifted its head at the touch of her hand on his shoulder and the level, unafraid look she kept on his face. As though he were a man she might come to trust and not a prize she meant to win, she danced beautifully. He had half expected her not to, expected the awkwardness of a woman out of practice, the stiff arms of the perpetually unasked, and instead she moved with him as though they had partnered 100 times, light and precise, her attention never leaving his face. It was that, more than the grace, that undid him a little. Every other woman he had ever danced with had watched the room over his shoulder, gauging who saw, counting her advantage. Charlotte Merrow watched only him, and watched with the cool curiosity of someone determined to work out whether he was a fraud. You are wondering, he said, why I am not a fraud. I am wondering, she corrected, why a man who has spent 11 years making a religion of caring for nothing should suddenly cross a ballroom for a woman he has never met. The most likely explanation is a wager. Men of your station make them constantly, and I have been the subject of 2 that I know of. And which of your fellow guests would you have me thrash for the second? The corner of her mouth moved, the first true movement toward a smile he had won from her, and he felt it out of all proportion to its size. You would not thrash anyone, Your Grace. You would do something far worse. You would be perfectly, unbearably polite to them for the rest of their lives and let them wonder why they never received another invitation. You have understood me completely, he said, on the strength of one dance. I have had to learn to understand people quickly, she said, and the lightness went out of her voice. It is what one develops instead of a dowry. They turned. Beyond her shoulder he could see Lady Pemberton and her circle, no longer laughing, their heads bent together in a new and busier conference, and he understood exactly what they were doing. They were revising the story. A moment ago Charlotte Merrow had been a spinster to be pitied. Now she was a spinster who had somehow snared the notice of Ravenmoor, and that could not be borne, and so it must be explained a trick, a scheme, a shamelessness on her part, anything but the plain fact that he had chosen to see her. He had watched this machine at work his whole life. He knew what it would grind out. Whatever they are about to say of me, Charlotte said, reading his glance, I hope you will not feel obliged to defend it. It only makes things worse. I have found it best simply to let them exhaust themselves. Cruelty tires in the end, if you refuse to feed it. Does it, he said. Usually. Sometimes not. She lifted one shoulder. One survives either way. Survival is a thing I am quite good at. It is nearly the only thing anyone has ever allowed me to become good at. The music was winding toward its close. He was aware of a reluctance in himself that startled him, a plain unwillingness to have the dance end and hand her back to the frozen window and the pitying crowd. He had come to this room armored in indifference, and he was leaving it, he realized, with the armor off, standing in the cold with 100 witnesses, and he found that he did not care. "Miss Merrow," he said, "may I call at your father's house tomorrow?" She missed a step. It was the only misstep she had made, and she recovered it instantly. But he had felt it, and he understood that he had at last said something she had not been 3 moves ahead of. "Why?" she said again, but this time the word had no armor in it. "Because one dance was not enough," Alaric said simply, "and I should like a second and a third, and to sit in your father's parlour and be corrected on my Latin, and to find out whether the thing I feel standing here is a folly of the evening or the first true thing I have wanted in 11 years. I do not know the answer. I would like the chance to learn it. That is all I am asking, a chance." The waltz ended. They stood a moment in the ringing quiet before the applause, his hand still at her waist, hers still on his shoulder, and Charlotte Merrow looked up at him with her guarded, clever eyes gone suddenly and terribly young. "You should not," she said very low. "You do not know what they will do to you for it. Men have paid dearly for less. And I am not. Your Grace, I am not a safe choice. I am 29 and poor, and I say what I think, and I have a name in this county for all 3. You could have anyone. Every mother here would sell her jewels to have you look at her girl the way you are looking at me, and you are looking at me, and I do not understand it, and I am afraid of it. Because I stopped hoping for exactly this a long time ago, and it took me years, and I do not think I could learn to stop again." It was the most he had heard her say, and the truest, and it went into him like a key into a lock he had forgotten he wore. "Then do not stop," he said. He called the next morning. Sir Rowland Merrow's house was a modest brick manor 2 hours from Ravenmoor, its gardens gone a little wild, its rooms warm and shabby and full of books. Charlotte received him in a parlour where the winter light came in strong and clear, and her father, a frail, sharp-eyed old man with a rug across his knees and a mind still keen as a blade, received him with the air of a man watching a wolf enter his hen-yard and reserving judgment on whether it meant to eat or only to look. "You are the Duke of Ravenmoor," Sir Rowland said. "I am, sir. My daughter tells me you danced with her at Ashcombe's and made rather a spectacle of it." "I did. And now you have driven a matched pair 2 hours through the frost to sit in my draughty parlour and drink my indifferent tea." The old man's eyes narrowed. "I am too old for games, Your Grace, and my Charlotte has been the subject of a great many played by people cleverer than they thought themselves and crueller than they'll admit. If you are one more of them, you may finish your tea and go, and I will thank you not to come again." "Father," Charlotte began. "No," Alaric said. "He is right to ask." He set down his cup. "I will tell you plainly, sir, what I told your daughter last night, so that you may judge me by the same words. I buried a wife 11 years ago, and I have not wished to look at another woman since. I am accounted cold, and I have earned it, and I have been at peace with it. I went to Ashcombe's meaning to leave as I always do, untouched and glad of it. And then I saw a room full of people who fancy themselves my betters agree that your daughter was worth nothing, and I saw your daughter refuse to believe them, and I have not been able to think of anything else since. I do not come with games, Sir Rowland. I come with a question I have not yet earned the right to ask. I ask only leave to earn it." The old man looked at him a long moment. Then he looked at his daughter, who had gone very still by the window with the light on her face, and something in his fierce old face softened by a degree. "Charlotte," he said, "do you want him to stay?" There was a silence. Alaric did not look at her. He kept his eyes on the fire and let the moment be hers, and he was aware that his heart was beating hard as a boy's, which it had not done in a very long time. "Yes," Charlotte Merrow said quietly. "I believe I do." "Then stay," said Sir Rowland, "and God help you both, because this county will not." The calls became a habit and then a necessity. He came on Tuesdays, and then on Tuesdays and Fridays, and then on any day the roads would carry him, and Ravenmoor's grooms, who had grown used to a master who rode out alone and returned in silence, began to remark to one another on the state of his coats and the fact that he had taken to whistling in the stable yard. At Merrow he was not a duke. That was the strange gift of the place, the thing he had not known he was starving for. In every other house in England he was a title first and a man a distance second, a fortune to be measured, an influence to be courted, an eligibility to be weighed. In Charlotte's shabby parlour he was simply a man who was frequently wrong about her race and had to be set right, a man who lost at chess and took it badly, a man Sir Roland argued politics with until the fire burned low and the old servant came to hint twice that it was very late for the roads. Charlotte gave him no deference at all, and he came to see that this was the highest compliment she knew how to pay. She did not treat him as a prize. She treated him as a person she was still deciding whether to trust, and the slow, honest work of earning that trust was the most engrossing thing he had ever undertaken. "You are staring again," she said one grey February afternoon, without looking up from the ledger she was mending, for she kept her father's accounts herself, and did it better than any steward, another thing the county held against her. "You do it a great deal. It is disconcerting." "I am trying to work out how you were let go by," he said. "How a whole county looked at you for 29 years and saw nothing. I cannot make the arithmetic come right." She set down her pen. When she looked up, her clever face had gone still in the way he had learned meant she was about to tell him something true and costly. "They saw exactly what they were looking for," she said. "A woman without money is a problem to be solved, married off, or pitied, or ignored, but a problem. And then when I refused Colonel Havering, who was a cruel man and would have made me small for 40 years, I stopped being a problem to be solved and became a problem that had refused to be solved, and there is no crime a poor woman can commit that a county resents more." "You are not asking why they saw nothing, Alaric. You are asking why you see something. And the answer, I think, is only you were the first one in a very long time who bothered to actually look at me before deciding what I was." She picked her pen back up. "It is not a mystery. It is only rare. Most people never look at anyone at all. They look at the story they have already been told and check that the person matches it." He was quiet a while. "Outside the rain came down steady and grey on the wild gardens. I did that," he said at last, "for 11 years. I looked at every woman in England and saw only the story that after Eleanor there could be nothing, that to feel again was to make myself a fool. I checked that each of them matched it. They all did, because I never once looked. And then I looked at you across a ballroom, and the story would not hold." He rose and crossed to the window and stood looking out at the rain, his back to her, because what he had to say was easier said to the glass. "I was so certain I was safe, Charlotte. I had built my whole life on the certainty that I would never want anything again. It was a comfortable life. I want you to understand that I am not sorry to have lost it. I am only telling you that you did not merely find an unmarried man. You found a man who had made a fortress of not wanting, and walked into the middle of it, and I have not the smallest wish to have my walls back." He heard the chair scrape. He heard her cross the room, and then her hand came to rest on his arm, the first time she had touched him unbidden. The first time in all those weeks she had reached for him rather than merely allowing him to reach, and when he turned she was looking up at him with the guardedness gone entirely from her face, gone as though it had never been. "I stopped hoping for this," she said, very low. "I told you that the first night. I want to tell you again now, so you know exactly what you are asking for. It took me years to stop Alaric, years to teach myself not to look at a man crossing a room and let my heart move, because it had been made to move and then made a fool of too many times. I built walls too, poorer walls than yours and cheaper, but I built them, and they kept me whole." Her fingers tightened on his arm. "And I am taking them down. Do you understand what that is for me? I am taking them down, and I am not certain I could build them again if you—" She stopped, steadied. "So I am asking you the only thing I will ever ask you. Be certain. Not tonight, not because the May Blossom is out and the county is watching, and it makes a fine story. Be certain the way a man is certain when the story has grown dull and the world has gone back to laughing, and it is only the two of us in a draughty parlour on a grey afternoon with the rain coming down. Be certain like that, or do not ask at all." "Charlotte," he said. He took her hand from his arm and held it in both of his. I have been certain since a room full of people told me you were nothing, and you declined to believe them. Everything since has only been my slow discovery of how much they underestimated. He raised her hand and pressed his mouth to her knuckles, and felt her breath catch. I am not certain because the blossom is out. I will be more certain in November, when it is dark at 4 and the roads are ice and there is nothing romantic in it at all, and I am still driving 2 hours to lose at chess to you. That is the certainty I am offering, the dull kind, the kind that lasts. She looked at him a long moment. And then Charlotte Merrow, who wept at music and would sooner die than be seen doing it, let her eyes fill, and did not turn away, and laughed instead, a wet, astonished, wholly undefended laugh, and it was exactly as he had known it would be, the finest sound he had ever heard. The county made one last attempt to break it before the banns were read. There was a subscription assembly at the Carrington Rooms in the market town, the great social event of the late winter, and it was understood that all the county would attend. Alaric took Charlotte. On her father's advice and against her own, better to face them all at once, in the open, than to be picked off one at a time in doorways, Sir Rowland had said, and he took her deliberately on his arm, in a gown the dowager had insisted on providing, deep green silk that made her look. Alaric thought like something risen out of a winter forest, dark and clear and impossible to look away from. They meant to cut her. He understood that the moment they entered the long candlelit room and felt the temperature of it drop. Lady Pemberton had done her work well. The whole assembly had agreed, in the way such assemblies agree, without a word being spoken aloud, that the Merrow woman was to be shown exactly how little her conquest had gained her. As Alaric led Charlotte down the room, the groups fell silent and then turned their shoulders, not all at once, but in a slow, deliberate ripple, one after another, the oldest cruelty of the polite world, the cut direct dressed up as mere inattention. A woman Charlotte had known since girlhood looked straight through her. A man who had dined at Merrow a dozen times found something absorbing to study on the far wall. He felt her arm stiffen under his hand. He did not slow, and neither did she, but he felt what it cost her, and something in him went white and very quiet. "Do not," Charlotte breathed. "I know what you are thinking. Do not make a scene. It is what they want. Let them turn their backs. I have survived worse, and it costs them more than it costs me. I am not going to make a scene," Alaric said. He stopped in the exact center of the long room, where the light was strongest and the whole assembly could see, and he lifted Charlotte's gloved hand from his arm. And he raised it to his lips, and he kissed it, slowly, deliberately, his eyes moving across the room as he did it, meeting each turned shoulder and each averted face and holding it until the person was forced to look back. It was not a scene. It was quieter and far more terrible than a scene. It was a duke of one of the oldest names in England informing an entire county, without a single raised voice, exactly where they had erred. "My friends," he said, and his voice was pleasant and carried to every corner, "I see you have not yet been introduced to my betrothed. Permit me. This is Miss Charlotte Merrow, who has consented to my very great and undeserved good fortune to become my wife. I mention it because there seems to be some confusion in the room as to her consequence, and I should like to resolve it. Her consequence is that she is to be the Duchess of Ravenmoor. Any person who finds that difficult to remember will find it correspondingly difficult to be received at Ravenmoor or at Marlbrook." Or he inclined his head unhurried. "Anywhere else I can arrange, and I can arrange a very great deal. I trust I make myself clear. I should so hate for any old friend to embarrass themselves by turning a shoulder to the future mistress of half this county. Now," he smiled, and it was a smile with no warmth in it at all, "I believe they are forming a set for the next dance. Miss Merrow and I will lead it. Do please join us." The silence held one heartbeat longer, and then, because the world is made of people who fear consequence far more than they love cruelty, the shoulders turned back, a path opened. Lady Pemberton, ashen behind her fan, sank into a curtsy so deep it was nearly an apology, and did not rise from it until Charlotte had passed. The musicians who had stopped found their instruments in a great hurry. And Alaric led Charlotte out into the center of the floor exactly as he had at Ashcombe's, into the full blaze of the light and the full stare of the room, except that now the stare had changed its character entirely, and every mother there was recalculating, with a sick lurch, Precisely how badly she had misjudged the season. You said you would not make a scene, Charlotte murmured as they turned. Her chin was high, but he felt her hand trembling his. I did not make a scene, he said. I made an announcement. There is a difference, and I stand upon it. He looked down at her, and let the coldness go out of his face and let her see what was underneath. I told you I would spend my life letting the world watch me choose you until the slowest of them understood. This is only the first lesson. There will be a great many. I intend to give every one. And Charlotte Merrow, in her forest green silk, in the center of the room that had come to break her, tipped back her head and laughed, the real laugh, the undefended one, and the whole county heard it and understood at last that had lost. Sir Roland was not wrong. The county did not forgive it. Within a week, the story Lady Pemberton's circle had ground out at the ball had hardened into settled fact. That Charlotte Merrow, that grasping spinster, had thrown herself at the Duke of Ravenmoor, with an artfulness so complete it had fooled even him. That she had trapped a grieving man in a moment of weakness. That any honest woman would have refused what any decent man would not have offered. Alaric heard it all, because they made certain he heard it. Invitations arrived barbed with concern for his welfare. His own aunt, the Dowager Countess of Marlbrook, drove out to Ravenmoor to sit in his library and tell him to his face that he was making himself ridiculous. She is 29, Alaric, the Dowager said. She is nobody. She has no fortune, no beauty to speak of, no connections worth the name, and a reputation for a sharp tongue that has already frightened off better men than she deserved. You are the last of your line. You owe your name a duchess it need not blush for. Marry the Fanshawe girl, or the Carrington, or any of a dozen who would grace your table and give you in hair and cost you nothing but the trouble of the wedding. But do not, I beg you, throw yourself away on a clever pauper the whole county laughs at. Alaric let her finish. Then he rose and crossed to the window of the library where the winter afternoon lay long and gold across the park, and he stood a while with his back to her. When Eleanor died, he said, you told me it would pass. Do you remember? You said grief was as a season and I would come out the other side of it and want to live again. And I did not, and I have not for 11 years. And every one of you who told me to marry again told me to marry a table decoration, a woman who would grace my rooms and cost me nothing. And I did not want to be married to a woman who cost me nothing. I wanted to be married to a woman who cost me everything, because that is what Eleanor was, and I had forgotten it was possible until a fortnight ago. He turned. Charlotte Merrow cost me everything, aunt. She costs me the good opinion of every fool I have ever bowed to. She costs me your approval and my peace, and the comfortable armor of a man who wants nothing. And I find that I am willing to pay it gladly twice over, because for the first time since I put my wife in the ground I am awake, and I would rather be awake and mocked than asleep and admired. You may laugh with the county if you like. I shall not be there to hear it. I shall be at Merrow being corrected on my Latin. The Dowager stared at him for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, she gave a short, dry bark of a laugh, and there was something almost like relief in her old eyes. Well, she said, you have not spoken to me with that much heat in 11 years. I begin to think the clever pauper has done what none of us could. Bring her to me, Alaric. If she can survive an afternoon of my questions, I shall know she is worth having. She gathered her shawl. And if that Pemberton woman opens her mouth about in my hearing, I shall shut it for her. I did not endure her mother. I shall not endure her. He courted Charlotte Merrow through the whole of that hard, bright winter, in the teeth of the county, and it was the happiest season of his life. He learned the shabby, warm rooms of her father's house, and the wild gardens, and the particular way she frowned over a chessboard, and the fact that she wept at music and would sooner die than let anyone see it. He learned that her sharpness was the scar tissue over a tenderness so large it had needed defending, and that when she at last let it show, the first afternoon she laughed, really laughed, at something he said, and looked up startled at the sound of her own joy. He would have burned Ravenmoor to the ground to hear it again. He brought her to the Dowager, and Charlotte matched the old woman question for question, until the Dowager declared her the only sensible female she had met in a decade and adopted her cause as her own. And in the spring, in the small grey church near Merrow with the May blossom heavy at the windows, before a congregation that had come half to witness and half to gawk, Alaric, Duke of Ravenmoor, married Charlotte Merrow, who was 29 and poor and clever and past all hope of a match, and who was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen as she came down the aisle on her father's frail arm with the light on her face and her eyes fixed, as they had been from the first, on him alone. Lady Pemberton was there. She had angled hard for an invitation, unable to bear being absent from the event she had spent all winter predicting could never occur, and she sat in a middle pew with her fan and her fixed smile and watched her whole cruel prophecy fail. Afterward, in the crush outside the church, she pressed forward to offer the new Duchess her congratulations in a voice pitched for the crowd. "Though I confess, Your Grace, we are all quite astonished. No one dreamed you would ever," and Charlotte turned to her with perfect, unhurried composure. The composure Alaric had first loved across a frozen ballroom, and said gently, so that everyone heard, "No one dreamed it, Lady Pemberton, because no one here has any imagination. I have always found that the people most certain of what is impossible are simply the people who have stopped looking. My husband looked. That is the whole of the difference between you, and it is why he is happy and you are not." She inclined her head graciously and turned away, and left Lady Pemberton standing alone in the churchyard with her fan and her failed prophecy and the dawning, unbearable understanding that she had been beaten not by a scheme, but by the plain fact that she had been wrong. Alaric took his wife's arm. Sir Rowland, from his chair in the shade of the churchyard yew, was weeping openly and not troubling to hide it. The May blossom drifted down like snow that did not chill. "You did not need to defend me," Charlotte murmured as they walked to the carriage. "I told you. It only makes things worse." "I did not defend you," he said. "You defended yourself, as you have always done, better than I ever could. I only stood beside you while you did it. I intend to spend the rest of my life standing beside you while you do it, Duchess, in this county and every other, and letting the whole world watch me choose you every day of my life, until even the slowest of them understands." He raised her gloved hand and pressed it to his lips there in the churchyard, before all of them, without hurry and without shame. "They said you were too old and past hoping, and beneath notice. I have never in my life made a choice I was more certain of, nor one I would defend more fiercely. You are not what I settled for, Charlotte. You are what I woke up for." And she, who had taught herself never to weep where anyone could see, let one tear fall, and did not wipe it away, and smiled up at him in the falling blossom as the bells rang out over the county that said it could never be.